This baby born in the underground maze became an orphan at birth. It could only grow up drinking monster milk. So this child possesses extraordinary powers, so powerful that it's not considered human. As the battle progresses, more and more of these children are being rescued. In that direction, they could vaguely see a blurry figure in the darkness, accompanied by low howls. As the dark figure appeared, everyone saw that it was an injured, bleeding, ram-horned monster. To his surprise, his sister hesitated for a long time before lowering her head. Enduring the pain, it swung a paw down. The horned berserker didn't retreat, but instead braced himself to block it with all his might. Then the parasite master broke its strength again. He immediately tried to stab the severed paw into the blood leopard's eye. This terrified the blood leopard, causing it to retreat and disappear. You shameless creature, using that trick again, running away when you can't win. He raised the severed claw, searching for the snow leopard's figure in the area. But he quickly realized he had underestimated the snow leopard's shamelessness, because the snow leopard was now using the ice spikes summoned by the mage to protect itself. But the blood leopard had miscalculated this time. The originally lifeless ice spikes suddenly came alive like snakes, trapping its body within. This was undoubtedly the mage's doing in a flash. The horned berserker was on top of the blood leopard's head, tightly gripping its mouth. "Let's see you run now," but unexpectedly his body was once again entwined by the blood leopard's tail. A horrifying scene suddenly appeared. The ancient saying holds true: taking good care of your teeth is truly crucial. It can save your life in critical moments. With the blood leopard's miserable howl, its tail was already broken in two. "Don't cry so miserably, you're overreacting a bit. This is just the beginning." As he spoke, he raised the severed paw in front of the blood leopard's terrified gaze. The man just found the monster's mouth too smelly, so he unreasonably jumped onto the monster's head. Unexpectedly, the monster wasn't easy to deal with either, wrapping its tail tightly around the man. She said sorry to him. Kim Jin-woo pretended not to mind and told his sister not to worry about it. At the same time, he reached into his pocket, intending to give his sister the earned payment as a dowry. Facing the offered snack, he didn't hesitate and bit down. The crispy texture made him unable to stop, biting it off in one go. At the same time, he thought about taking the monster home to eat. No sooner said than done. He raised the severed paw and slammed it down on the blood leopard's head. It's unclear how long he kept hitting. The blood leopard finally collapsed with a miserable howl. This creature was really troublesome. But its large body would be enough to eat for 10 to 15 days. At this moment, cheers from the side caught his attention. It turned out Jean Genuine had already dealt with the other blood leopard. The horned berserker had been waiting nearby. He immediately knelt down to pay respects to his lord. Faced with Jean Genuine's praise, he wasn't happy at all. Instead, he fell into deep self-blame for the sacrifice of his clansmen. Jean Genuine naturally saw through his thoughts. He didn't want the newly awakened hero to fall into some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. He immediately admonished, "Whether it's soldiers or you, all are willing to die for Jeloa. If you think you're responsible for everyone just because you've become stronger, then you're being too presumptuous." Jean Genuine's words instantly enlightened the horned berserker. Seeing that his admonition had taken effect, he immediately struck while the iron was hot. He appointed the horned berserker as the commanding general of the Jeloa Labyrinth and bestowed him the name Cunion. The horned berserker was immediately excited to tears, vowing on the spot to do his utmost and be willing to die for the cause. This scene made Lisa, who was standing nearby, no longer doubt Jean Genuine's ability to manage the labyrinth. At the same time, she was surprised that he could win people's hearts so deeply. Meanwhile, he instructed Cunion to bring the injured mage and the blood leopard back to the labyrinth. He solemnly reminded them to be careful because that blood leopard was still alive. But he found that the payment was in his coat. He instinctively looked towards a maze. He had intended to capture both alive, but during the fight, he accidentally killed one of the blood leopards. However, he did obtain a blood leopard's heart, which contained its fierce power. The gains from this operation were truly pitiful. Of course, he said this for Lisa to hear behind him. Earlier, to persuade Jean Genuine to attack the blood leopards, Lisa had claimed that the blood leopards were hiding a large number of gems. Lisa could naturally hear the sarcasm in his words and hurriedly knelt down. Taking this opportunity, he let Lisa make one last choice. If she pledged allegiance to the Jeloa Labyrinth, he could help Lisa take revenge, kill the Elf King, and rescue her family. But he didn't mention the consequences if she didn't submit. Unexpectedly, Lisa spoke frankly, saying she wanted to wait until the war between Jean Genuine and the Flood Dragon King was over. Before making her choice, however, as soon as she finished speaking, a large hand firmly gripped her neck. so you're planning to join the side that ultimately wins. I guess you still don't understand your situation. You're the first person to still be alive after betraying me for so long. Don't test my patience anymore, you must make a choice now. Terrifying parasitic tentacles once again crawled onto Lisa's face. This wasn't really a choice at all. Clearly, Lisa was already inside the Jaula labyrinth. Meanwhile, Duomi was arranging the spoils of war brought back by Cunion. But the scene before him made his pupils constrict. A small monster had already taken the coat off its tongue and seemed to be stealing something. Shortly after, Jinjenu also returned to the labyrinth. However, Lisa was following behind him. It seemed Lisa had made the right choice. His appearance surprised Duomi greatly. He was one of only 2 people in the labyrinth who knew Lisa was a spy. His expression immediately changed, glaring at Lisa with a fierce look. Don't be like that, Duomi. Lisa is now one of us. Then he changed the subject, asking Lisa to inform everyone about the Flood Dragon King's intelligence. Upon learning that the Flood Dragon King would arrive at their gates in 5 days, Jinjenu immediately made arrangements for the impending war. He ordered Cunion to lead the soldiers in building watchtowers and setting traps in front of the labyrinth. At the same time, he ensured that all soldiers would be trained within 3 days. As for himself, he planned to go underground to get some gems and also bring back some human weapons from the surface. He agreed to return in 3 days and then formulate a battle plan based on Lisa's intelligence. Meanwhile, the Flood Dragon King's army was advancing towards the Jallo labyrinth, led by siege beasts clearing the way. The 2 figures before us are the great generals accompanying the Flood Dragon King on this expedition, Zage and He was an overlord entrenched in the underground labyrinth, relying on his powerful strength. He arbitrarily captured and enslaved other weaker forces. Now he was leading an army composed entirely of monsters, advancing majestically towards the direction of the Jallo labyrinth. He immediately felt uneasy. In just a moment of turning around, he had been robbed by a small monster being robbed by a monster. 5 days later, under Jean Jenny's command, the Jallo labyrinth forces were already on high alert, having completed their pre-war preparations. After Jean Jen used summoning over the past few days, his forces had grown numerous and powerful. The scarce mages had increased to 5 duomas. At this time, Lisa also reported the intelligence she had gathered. The enemy's total number was 121, including 100 ordinary soldiers, 18 commander-level warriors, 2 heroes as huge as gate beasts, and the Flood Dragon King, who was personally leading the expedition. After hearing the report, Jean Jinyu was surprised to find that the enemy had no long-range attack forces, but the opponent was a long-established power entrenched in the underground labyrinth for years, so he had to be cautious. While he was still pondering countermeasures, Duomi's exclamation interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he saw dust rolling in the distance and could vaguely see the enemy's silhouettes. As the battle was about to begin, Lisa brought out the map and briefly reviewed the battle deployment with Jean Jinyu once more. Then, a Jean Genu signal, Duomi issued the battle orders and they were sent out, but the commanding general glanced at Yellow Dragon, who had been lurking around suspiciously. I imagine you've had a very fulfilling few days. No, Master, you're joking. I don't want to be used as practice anymore. If that's the case, then prove that you can do something other than being a punching bag. Just like that, Yellow Dragon was tricked by Jean Genu to the front lines again. What does it feel like to lose 500,000? However, the man remained calm. This fool was recognized by the enemy as soon as he appeared. After all, there were old acquaintances who had worked together in the Dragon Labyrinth before. Now that Yellow Dragon had betrayed them and joined the Jello Labyrinth, he naturally faced their mockery. Is the Jello Labyrinth out of people? They actually sent you a lizard who claims to be a dragon descendant to speak. Meanwhile, Zage was secretly observing the Jello Labyrinth's formation. Unexpectedly, this observation made his heart tremble and become cautious. Because he discovered that within the Jaula formation, several mages seemed to be brewing magic, he immediately decided to strike first. Then he raised his arm, and the monsters behind him immediately swarmed towards the Jaula camp. He took the opportunity to retreat, came to the flood camp, and issued a plan to eliminate the Jello mages. Only then did he feel at ease to face Yellow Dragon in battle. He sprang up, his body launching into the air with 2 giant blades in his hands aimed at Yellow Dragon. However, facing Zade's lethal strike, Yellow Dragon seemed distracted. With a crisp sound, the same scene happened again. Yellow Dragon, hit by the giant blade, remained unscathed. Zade was stunned. He swung another blade, but still no wound appeared. Damn it, I don't believe this. His speed suddenly increased, his figure turning into several afterimages slashing a yellow dragon, but the more he slashed, the more dangerous it became. He said goodbye to his sister, then quickly closed the door, locked it from the inside, and rushed back to the secret room. Duomi, who had been watching the situation on the field, now worried about Yellow Dragon. Master, Yellow Dragon is not moving at all. Could he be scared stiff again? Jean Genius silently raised his hand, signaling Duomi not to worry. As you know, this guy is afraid of death. Because of this, he's very good at gauging his opponent's strength. The reason he's passively taking hits now might be to assess his opponent's abilities. This explanation made Duomi even more confused. Yellow Dragon's weakness is on his back, yet he's not dodging. It must be said that Jean Jinyu was once again acting when facing Duomi's questions. This should also be one of this fool's tricks. He's testing if his opponent knows his weakness. In general, this guy is strong against the strong and weak against the weak. Meanwhile, Zage, who had failed repeatedly, was on the verge of a mental breakdown. Using his last bit of faith, he unleashed his strongest killing move. The two giant blades in his hands, wrapped in fierce power, slashed towards Yellow Dragon's back. The massive impact caused the giant blades to shatter the moment they touched Yellow Dragon. This time, Zage's mental state completely collapsed, his face full of disbelief. Suddenly, Yellow Dragon's hands reached out, firmly grasping Zage. A piece of trash like you dares to mock me as a mongrel dragon, a lizard with diluted bloodline. Today, let me show you the basic moves of a dragon descended. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying dragon breath spewed from his mouth. The scorching dragon fire instantly enveloped and burned Zage. In the blink of an eye, Zage was burned beyond recognition, like a pile of melted mud. He ran towards the steps, but by then the pickpocketing monster had already disappeared. He hurriedly picked up his coat, emptied its contents, and his mood instantly plummeted. Then Yellow Dragon grabbed him again. Zage, you disappoint me. I thought you flood dragons were also dragon descendants and should be immune to fire. Now it seems your bloodline is not as pure as mine. Suddenly, another dragon breath shot out from Yellow Dragon's mouth, incinerating Zage completely. After finishing off Zage, he casually struck a pose he thought was cool. This guy was still that Chinabi fool. His series of actions was truly impressive. Seeing Zage killed and fearing Yellow Dragon's dragon breath would devour them next, Zage's subordinates fell into chaos. As they fled in panic, these deserting soldiers were suddenly caught by a giant tentacle. It was one of Zade's commander-level monsters. You deserters, let me send you to execute the plan to slaughter Jalua's mages. Saying this, it lifted the soldiers, aiming at the mage's position in the Jalua camp. In an instant, several dragon labyrinth soldiers were hurled like cannonballs towards the Jalua camp. This unbelievable method, could this be the dragon labyrinth's long-range attack? A level 600 giant beast grabbed a level 200 minion. One by one, these small monsters were forcibly thrown towards Jala, regardless of whether they lived or died. This sudden and cruel attack method made Duomi somewhat panicked. He suggested ordering the archers to shoot them down in advance, but Jean Genu rejected the idea. There's no need to waste the archers' energy on these small monsters. Besides, for such aerial targets, arrows would have minimal effect. It's time to test the quality of our mage corps. He then ordered 2 mages from the corps to be assigned for defense. Damn it, everything else was there, only the envelope with the money was stolen. Immediately, 2 mages took off their cloaks, revealing their wands, and began chanting spells. Instantly, clusters of ice spikes sprang up from the ground where the monsters were about to land. The monsters had nowhere to dodge and experienced the chilling sensation through their bodies. The few that slipped through were caught by the nearby 5 beasts. Without a word, they were given a free return ticket. This move was nothing short of a provocation to the flood beasts, who began throwing more enthusiastically. Jean Jinyu was inspired by this and immediately ordered the gate beasts to continue the same tactic. To lure the flood army into the preset ambush area, at this time Duomi also reported the current situation on the field. With Yellow Dragon holding the middle, it was temporarily secure. However, after the enemy commander's age was killed, the enemy's central forces dispersed to both sides. They were now attacking our weaker left and right flanks. Our defense line was about to break. Should we activate the trap now? After a moment's thought, Jean Geniu ordered Cunian to lead troops to defend the right side, while Yellow Dragon was moved from the center to the left. His intention was to hold the defense until the big fish took the bait, then close the net. Just then, Lisa, who had been out scouting the Flood Dragon King, returned. Judging from her anxious expression, she probably didn't bring good news. Angrily, he threw down the coat. He slumped dejectively on the throne. Suddenly, the once noisy battlefield fell into silence. Everyone stopped fighting and turned to look deeply shocked by the scene before them. Lisa, is this the news you want to report? Yes, Master. Our enemy, the main force led by the Flood Dragon King, has arrived. There are 150 monsters. The rest are all commander-level giant beasts. There are also over 30 projectile-type monsters. After hearing Lisa's report, Jin Genu remained calm on the surface, but he couldn't help feeling nervous inside. So you're saying those fighting on the front lines now are just their advanced troops? Adding it all up, the number of their commander level of giant beasts alone exceeds the total number of soldiers in the entire Jela Labyrinth. Worse still, it was still 2 hours before the Labyrinth would upgrade to level 5. Many of his tactics could only be implemented after the Labyrinth upgrade. The key now was to survive these 2 hours. Meanwhile, following the direction pointed by the Flood Dragon King, the bugler immediately understood. The horns sounded again. Instantly, all the monsters in the entire army stopped advancing. Then, one by one, the monsters were grabbed by commander-level beasts. Immediately after, they were forcefully thrown into the air. In an instant, countless monsters appeared in the sky, raining down like hail towards the Jaula camp. Seeing this situation, Jin Geniu could no longer sit still. He immediately stood up and ordered to concentrate firepower. Aiming at the enemy's air force, he insisted that the archers must hold on as the time to activate the trap was not yet ripe. The bodyguards immediately raised their guns and moved to the front, forming a battle formation. Kim Jin-woo hurriedly tried to stop them, but it was too late. That was money he had saved up for a long time through hard work. At the same time, he ordered the mages to reinforce the surface of the trap with ice. It seemed he planned to lure more monsters into the trap before taking action. Soon after, Duomi reported back that the mage's magic power was about to be exhausted. This made Jin Genu feel regretful because the commander-level bees had not yet entered the trap area. But at this point, he had no choice but to order the activation of the trap. Without the support of magic, the once solid ground suddenly became loose. The monsters that were charging forward just moments ago now realized the danger. But before they could react, they fell into the trap one after another with countless casualties. Some monsters that luckily climbed up on the bodies of their comrades. Unfortunately, encountered Cunian, who had been waiting for a long time. After a fierce battle, the casualties of the Jello El Aberrant increased sharply. But the battle results were also quite fruitful. The trap alone killed 20% of the enemy's main force. By now, the terrain of the battlefield had changed. With bottomless pits on both sides, only a narrow passage remained leading to the Jawa Labyrinth. He immediately ordered Yellow Dragon and Cunian, the two heroes, to guard the entrance. The rest of the soldiers were arranged in staggered formation to reduce the impact of aerial troops on the camp. At the same time, he announced to all troops to aim their attacks at the weak spots under the monster's jaws. Jin Geniu's series of deployments and responses had already left Lisa secretly amazed. She couldn't help but ask where he learned these military tactics. This question caught Jin Genio off guard. He had planned to use it as a dowry for his sister to repay his adoptive family. At this moment, he accidentally touched the pearl on the throne's armrest. As a veteran netizen, these were just basic operations in online games. No need to make such a fuss. Little did he know his words stirred up a storm in Lisa's heart. It was too terrifying. Humans actually treated war as a game. This sister was somewhat overly jealous. She probably hadn't even heard of the term online game. Then the right side of the Jelal Labyrinth seemed to be penetrated by a terrifying force from inside out. With Duomi's exclamation, a brutally fierce monster suddenly emerged, letting out a thunderous roar at them. A horned lion beast with a ferocious appearance appeared before everyone. Lisa immediately recognized it as the siege beast led by the Flood Dragon King. However, the surprises were far from over. Amidst rolling dust, a troop of cavalry emerged from the breach hole. What on earth was this? Each wielding long swords, moving with ghosts-like speed, they charged straight towards the Jala camp, swinging their swords without hesitation. Before they could recover from these successive dramatic changes, they noticed the siege beast roaring and charging towards their direction. In this critical moment, Jin Jinyu forced himself to calm down. He issued an order for all Jello-off forces to retreat to the second line of defense. At the same time, he ordered the gate beast to assist Cunian, who was guarding the right side to block the intruding troops. But Duomi worried that Cunian's strength might not be enough to resist and suggested sending Yellow Dragon directly into battle. Unexpectedly, the left defense line guarded by Yellow Dragon was also in a precarious situation. It was clear that if this dragon's breath were extinguished, the defense line might collapse instantly. In this critical moment, Lisa volunteered to fight. Master, that troop is the Flood Dragon King's elite force. Each of them has the strength of an elite monster. Moreover, I spotted war among them. Cunion's strength is no match for them. Suddenly, a set of control skills appeared out of thin air. Like the tattoo on his arm, the pearl on the throne could also summon a control interface. So let me go assist Cunion. In fact, since her allegiance, Lisa had felt that Jean Genu didn't fully trust her. That's why she made this gesture to prove her loyalty. Jean Genu, in need of manpower, hesitated only briefly before agreeing to Lisa's request. Then Jean Genu issued another order that shocked Duomi, but given the critical battle situation, Duomi dared not ask more. He immediately relayed the order to the Mage Corps. Under the combined efforts of the mages, a huge ice sculpture rose from the ground, vaguely visible. The ice sculptures seemed to have a terrifying primordial divine head. Under the mage's control, the ice sculpture shot up like a giant snake. In the next second, it crashed heavily into the enemy's main force. The shattered ice shards also harvested a batch of monsters, but even more terrifying was a surge of overwhelming power rising from the dust, followed by a sky-shaking roar that instantly made the monster's heart tremble. Master, what if the snow leopard pounces on us now? Meanwhile, Jean Genu had activated his parasitic form. Don't worry, I've already released my aura. If he comes over, I don't mind beating him up again. Although we cured him, we also starred him for 5 days. I believe he'll make the right choice. The snow leopard had actually sensed that terrifying aura behind him long ago. He looked back deeply at the platform, then immediately started attacking the monsters around him like a madman, as if venting his pent-up grief and anger. With Shidao joining, they temporarily held off the enemy's main force attack. This gave Jean Genu time to deal with the situation. According to the system prompt, to find that small monster, Kim Jinwoo must first complete the synchronization and activation of the maze entrance. The siege bees turned around and smashed the chair with one punch. Suddenly, a giant hammer appeared in its hand. Then, under Duomi and Jincha's gaze, it channeled energy throughout its body. It leaped up, swinging the giant hammer towards the siege beast crowd. The powerful hammer came crashing down. The siege beast was instantly split open, letting out a miserable howl. Unexpectedly, the severely injured siege beast didn't stop and ignored him. Jean Genu was shocked, thinking this is bad. Is its target Duomi? He immediately shouted for Duomi to hide. Hearing this, Duomi quickly retreated into the Jalwa labyrinth. In a flash, the siege beast's massive body also crashed into the entrance, but due to the small opening, half of its body got stuck. Jean Genu was extremely anxious, shouting desperately for Duomi outside the cave. At this moment, Duomi's voice entered Jean Genu's mind. He had luckily survived and discovered that the siege beast target wasn't him, but the core of the Jalwa labyrinth. Hearing this, Jean Genu immediately realized the gravity of the situation. On the other side, the always boasting Yellow Dragon suddenly felt his body lighten. He was actually lifted up by Jean Genu with all his might, instantly shocked to his core. Master, can we talk about this? I'm afraid of heights. Go stop the siege beast from entering the labyrinth. Jean Genu couldn't be bothered to waste words with him. Without hesitation, he pressed the sync confirmation button. You simply threw him over, Master. No, you must be joking, right? At this moment, Jean Genu's voice came from behind. You're a dragon of pure bloodline. What are you afraid of? These words seemed to have a magical effect, making Yellow Dragon radiate divine light and boosting his confidence. No matter what method you use, even if you have to hug its leg, you must stop it at all costs. Unexpectedly, Yellow Dragon, that iron-headed fool, really went to hug its leg. Meanwhile, the battle was intense and at a stalemate. Thanks to Shupa, the Jalwa soldiers had safely retreated to the second line of defense, but there were still endless paratroopers being dropped into the defense line. However, that infiltrated elite force had caused 20% casualties among the Jalwa camp soldiers. On the other side, Canyon and Lisa were surrounding and attacking the elite Captain War, but even in a 2-on-1 situation, they were in constant danger and had both been injured. The only one who seemed fortunate was Shupa, with his agile speed and sharp claws. He steadily held the middle route. Now he had even charged into the Flood Legion, advancing while eating and killing, playing fiercely. The monsters of the Flood Legion were all being slaughtered by him. Shupa pounced toward the monster again. Unexpectedly, a sudden punch shattered all his fangs, then a giant hand grabbed him high in the air. Little thing, I wonder what you'll taste like when roasted. As soon as the words were spoken, a terrifying dragon breath suddenly erupted, blasting several dozen meters away. Instantly, the originally dim secret room suddenly lit up with a dazzling white light. Then a deep voice suddenly resonated in his mind. Everything in its path was reduced to ashes. Along with the destruction, half of the soldiers in Jala's left camp were also annihilated. This devastating scene was witnessed by Duomi, who had just escaped and walked out of the maze. He hurriedly warned in a panicked voice, "Master Jean Jinian, the Flood Dragon King, has personally entered the battle." The ferocious monster in its bloodline connection was perhaps quickly fattening up, just as the blood-crazed beast was revealing its smooth and tender self. It was suddenly struck by a punch that shattered all its fangs. Strangely, the severely injured blood leopard didn't feel any urge to resist. It was simply picked up obediently by the giant hand, ignored in front of everyone's eyes. The immense shock caused by the terrifying dragon lizard on the battlefield, those engaged in fierce combat couldn't help but stop and watch. That enormous figure emanating a fierce aura all over its body. Lisa realized that with the appearance of the Flood Dragon King, it must also be time for his subordinate monsters to launch an all-out attack. The battle would become even more brutal. Right now, what Kanai needed to do was to hold off her as much as possible, waiting for Jean Genyu to defeat the Flood Dragon King. Jean Genyu had already flashed in front of the Flood Dragon King, blocking his advance. Garora May's 123rd generation owner Kim Jinwoo activation successful, as the system synchronized and obtained Kim Jinwoo's personal information. What was expected to be an immediate clash of kings, unexpectedly the Flood Dragon Kings suddenly had the idea of recruiting him. However, what responded to him was Jean Jenny's furious cold anger. A hammer strike, as expected, his powerful attack didn't cause any damage. Instead, he was almost shaken off by the strong impact force. As his body fell, he activated his scout eye, scanning the Flood Dragon King. Although he was mentally prepared, the result still surprised him because he couldn't find any weaknesses at all. Even joints, scales, or parts like the eyes were incredibly sturdy. On the other hand, the Flood Dragon King didn't seem angry at Jean Genius' sudden attack. "I wanted to give you a reason to live. After all, I'm also curious how a human became the Lord of Jala." Unexpectedly, Jean Genius didn't dare to ramble with him and directly mocked. His bravado is just to cover up the fact that he's afraid of human weapons. As soon as these words were spoken, the Flood Dragon King seemed to be hit in a sore spot. He roared in anger and threw a furious punch. The wild and domineering force caused countless rock fragments to scatter and fly. Jean Geniao, who narrowly escaped, shot out from the dust. Still fearful in his heart, he thought, such a huge body, yet such speed this is. Suddenly, a giant claw appeared as if out of thin air right in front of him. Seeing no way to avoid it, a thought flashed through his mind. Harmful tentacles instantly covered his entire body. He forcefully withstood the Flood Dragon King's sudden heavy strike, dispersing the dust. Just as he was about to counterattack, a searing heat hit him right in the face. The previously dark and terrifying secret room was gradually changing. In no time, the maze reconstruction was complete. It was the terrifying dragon breath spewed by the Flood Dragon King, instantly engulfing Jean Jenny's figure. Duomi, who had been watching the battle situation, saw his master in such peril and couldn't help but tremble in fear. He could only vent his anger on Yellow Dragon beside him. He scolded harshly, "You were hugging the thigh just now, how come you're hugging the tail now? Are you capable or not? Miss, the siege beast's thigh is too thick, not good. The tail end is just the right size, perfect for hugging." As he spoke, he pretended to look busy and hardworking. This scene made Duomi even more furious. As they were speaking, two strange figures flashed out of the dust like ghosts. The Flood Dragon King immediately reached out, trying to grab those two figures. Unexpectedly, he only grabbed some tentacles. Those two ghostly figures had already appeared behind the Flood Dragon King, leaping high. The two figures strangely intertwined, merging into one. Then they swung a giant hammer, aiming at the back of the Flood Dragon King's head and smashing down. A thunderous sound like a bolt from the blue shook the surroundings. The Flood Dragon King also seemed to have suffered severe damage from this strike. Enduring great pain, he swung back forcefully, knocking the giant hammer out of Jean Jinyu's hand. However, another strange scene occurred. Jean Jinyu's right hand evolved into tentacles, wrapping around and pulling back the falling hammer. At the same time, his left hand also transformed into tentacles, entangling the Flood Dragon King's arm. Using the momentum, he swung his body and appeared behind the Flood Dragon King's head again. He picked up the giant hammer and delivered another powerful heavy blow. He probably intended to use the hammer strike to turn the Flood Dragon King's brain in a tofu pudding. Compared to its previous appearance, the scene before him had improved more than just a little. Moreover, this close combat grappling style rendered the dragon lizard's breath completely useless. Then, using the same method and relying on his strange abilities, he darted and maneuvered around various parts of the Flood Dragon King's enormous body, repeatedly succeeding in his attacks. Just then, a powerful wave suddenly emanated from the Flood Dragon King's entire body. Immediately after, a beam of dark light shot up into the sky. Jin Jinyu, who had landed to the side, was also shocked at this moment. However, the monsters on the battlefield belonging to the Flood Legion upon seeing this scene were not excited. Instead, they were all terrified, turning tail and running, wishing they had 2 more legs. Their behavior naturally caught Lisa's attention. She thought Jin Jinyu had already defeated the Flood Dragon King, causing this situation. Turning to War, who was still confronting them, she said, "Your legion is already in disarray. Do you still want to fight to the death?" Unexpectedly, War responded with a sneer. "Actually, it's you who should be running. At the same time, I should thank your Lord of Jala for letting me see the Flood Dragon King go all out once again. He is the overlord of this region, possessing strength comparable to the gods. With part of the dragon bloodline still in his body, every part of his body is incredibly sturdy." However, after enduring Jin Jinyu's relentless beating, the Flood Dragon King had no choice but to angrily activate his second stage transformation. Seeing this, Jin Jinyu immediately activated the scout in his parasitic form. He was surprised to find that after the transformation, the defense was no longer impenetrable as before but showed multiple weak points. Clearly, this was to gain stronger offensive power. He conjured the control panel. Apart from the addition of Mei's entrance information, there were no other changes. He had sacrificed some defense. Now that he had discovered the opponent's weaknesses, Jin Jinyu began to formulate his plan. Suddenly, the system popped up a warning of a fatal threat. Before he could react, the Flood Dragon King's lethal attack had already descended. In that life or death moment, he instinctively raised his arms to block. But he was still sent flying by this sudden heavy blow, crashing hard into the rock wall. However, just as Jin Jinyu emerged with his injured arm, the Flood Dragon King's attack came again without pause. Hurriedly exerting force from his feet, he flashed to the side. Taking advantage of the momentum, he kicked the Flood Dragon King in the face. This kick didn't do much damage, but it was extremely insulting. It enraged the Flood Dragon King, who turned and unleashed a mouthful of intense 100-year dragon breath. Facing death again, his hair stood on end. With no time to think, his left arm instantly transformed into tentacles and plunged into the ground. Using the inertia to pull himself down, he narrowly escaped. His battle instincts were truly remarkable. Jin Jinyu didn't dare to be careless upon landing. He immediately assumed a defensive stance. The Flood Dragon King's continuous attacks clearly showed no intention of giving him any breathing room. His original plan was to rely on close-quarters combat to prevent the Flood Dragon King from using his dragon breath. But after transformation, the Flood Dragon King's speed had greatly increased, leaving him at a loss. As he pondered, the Flood Dragon King unleashed another powerful attack. Several energy orbs containing terrifying power spewed from his mouth, hurtling towards him in an overwhelming wave. At this moment, Jin Jinyu found himself in an inescapable, deadly situation. The bodyguards were already too worked up. The massive damage caused the Ramhorn monster to emit a shockwave before dying. But what did this mean? He was told that after synchronizing and activating the Mei's entrance, he would be able to find a small monster and get his money back. The parasite, seemingly sensing its host's life was in danger, automatically unlocked the cognitive speed skill for him. However, this skill would consume a large amount of the parasite's life force. But there was no time to consider much else. Instantly, a subtle sensation swept through his entire body. It felt as if everything around him had become extremely slow, as if time had slowed down several times. At the same time, he felt his body being drained, becoming increasingly heavy. This symptom wouldn't be remedied without drinking 10 or 8 boxes of kidney tonic. It seemed this was quite a dangerous life-saving measure. There was no time to waste. He quickly fled, but this guy was also slyly cunning, escaping towards the Flood Dragon King's legion. Indeed, under his guidance, and with the Flood Dragon King's tacit cooperation, they successfully caused numerous casualties among the unfortunate and innocent Flood Legion. Now he finally understood why the monsters of the Flood Legion turned tail and ran when the Flood Dragon King transformed. Suddenly, several whistling sounds emerged from the dust cloud, carrying Jean Fingwell with them. Unexpectedly, the Flood Dragon King casually swept his hand, easily destroying the spears. But Genius' stance at this moment made the Flood Dragon King feel deeply insulted. A top-tier boss was being provoked by someone wielding toothpicks. This was intolerable. With a roar, he swooped towards the mirror, his claw fiercely striking. However, Genius dodged it with a quick movement. Just as Kim Jin-woo was grumbling about this and closing the control interface, a sneaky figure appeared at the entrance of the maze. Simultaneously, he took the opportunity to control his tentacles, violently swinging the spears. The Flood Dragon King, unable to dodge in time, was hit multiple times. Being humiliated again, the Flood Dragon King was instantly filled with uncontrollable rage. His right claw, imbued with a fierce aura, suddenly shot out, determined to crush Jinjinyu with one palm. At such close range, Jinjinyu dared not delay. He immediately activated his rapid memory skill. At the same time, his arm transformed into tentacles, grabbing and destroying the giant hammer. Then, instead of retreating, he darted under the Flood Dragon King's body. Immediately after, he leaped up and heavily smashed the hammer onto the knee joint. This explosive hammer blow made the Flood Dragon King's enormous body shudder. Unable to withstand the damage, he fell on all fours, kneeling before Jinjinyu. It seems you as a dragon still have some talent for becoming a lizard. Being repeatedly humiliated by the human before him, the Flood Dragon King's accumulated anger reached its peak, but he was actually waiting for a chance to deliver a fatal blow. Now is the perfect opportunity. He suddenly raised his head, ready to unleash his long-prepared dragon breath. However, just as he opened his mouth, several packages were delivered to his mouth by tentacles. Those packages were high-explosive bombs that Jinjinyu had specially prepared in advance. The moment the scorching dragon breath contacted the bombs, they detonated. Ignoring Jinjinyu's anger, he guessed that the Flood Dragon King would be at least half crippled, if not dead, after this. Suddenly, a huge mouth burst through the smoke, lunging fiercely. Their eyes met. After confirming with a glance, he was sure it was the right one. In a split second, Jinjinyu immediately tried to activate his speed skill. However, this time the skill didn't respond. It turned out that after the previous use, the parasite's energy was depleted and it had fallen into hibernation. In that moment of hesitation, he was swallowed by the Flood Dragon King. Now truly cornered, he could only raise his hands and struggle desperately. The strong desire to survive in his heart made him unwilling to die like this. But without the parasite's enhancement, his strength alone was far from enough to shake the Flood Dragon King. Seeing its master being swallowed, Duomi's mind went blank instantly. It collapsed to the ground as if losing its backbone. Seeing this, the Flood Dragon King's ferocious face showed a victorious expression, completely unaware that the matter was far from over. As the final 3 seconds ended, the Jello May successfully upgraded to level 5. Immediately, a series of system pop-up notifications appeared, repairing all damage to the Lord of Jello's body, restoring the parasite's energy. The parasite has awakened from hibernation. In the darkness, Jinjinyu slowly appeared as it protected by the parasite's eye-binding cocoon. The man had managed to survive for 3 seconds in the monster's mouth to stay alive because only in this way could he be reborn and turn the tables. Just as the Flood Dragon King was gloating, thinking he had eliminated Jinjinyu, a sudden change occurred. Amidst intense tremors, the gel maze expanded by dozens of meters. Unexpectedly, the entrance was also widened. The siege beast seized the opportunity to break through. Huang Long, that iron-headed fool, couldn't stop them at all. One side of the gel maze made the Flood Dragon King feel inexplicably uneasy. The next second, an irresistible force pride opened his huge mouth. Jinjinyu's figure suddenly appeared between the jagged fangs. Taking advantage of the Flood Dragon King's shock, he flashed out of the giant mouth. But how could the Flood Dragon King be content to let his tender morsel escape just like that? Roaring and swinging his powerful claws, he pounced again. But Jinjinyu was not about to sit idly by. Seizing the opportunity, he swung his arm forcefully, once again accurately throwing explosives into the beast's mouth. The little monster immediately turned to flee. Unexpectedly, Kim Jin-woo was faster, instantly flashing behind the small monster. A violent explosion suddenly echoed through the heavens and earth. Jinjinyu, upon landing, hastily activated his scout eye again. Because he knew that even if the bomb exploded in the Flood Dragon King's mouth, it wouldn't cause much damage. However, the brief experience of being swallowed by the Flood Dragon King earlier had given him a vague idea of where the Flood Dragon King's fatal weakness might be. His current action was to verify his guess. The facts before his eyes were indeed as he had expected. In his heart, he immediately took courage. Sword-wielding arm was broken by Jinjinyu's sneak attack. Immediately after, he controlled his tentacles to snatch Er's sword. This seemingly unprovoked action appeared to be solely for seizing the sword. Unexpectedly, Yuar, despite losing his arm, endured the pain and threw a fierce punch. However, Jin Genu turned even faster, bringing down the sword with force, cleaving Yuar in two. Such an effortless kill made Lisa reassess his strength to an unimaginable level once again. Meanwhile, subordinates had discovered their leader's death. They immediately rushed at Jin Genu from all directions. Little did they know, this gave Jin Genu the perfect opportunity to take them all out at once. This bizarre and shocking scene left Lisa and Cunian speechless. But even more terrifying was that ugly little heads grew on the tentacles, opening huge mouths to devour all of subordinates. Taking advantage of this moment, Jin Genu gestured for Cunian to hand over the handcrafted sword. But just as Jin Genu reached out to take the sword, Lisa seemed to discover something terrifying and let out a startled scream. He reached out a claw, directly grabbing its neck and lifting it up. Such a subtle approach obviously didn't scare the little monster. It struggled desperately to break free. Since the little creature was so ungrateful, Kim Jinwoo decided not to be gentle. Jin Genu immediately sensed danger and decisively activated his rapid speed skill. Instantly, everything around him except himself slowed down. At this moment, the Flood Dragon King's claws were already within reach, but they were descending at an incredibly slow pace. Jin Jinwoo immediately braced himself, and energy surged through his body in an instant. Surging power suddenly rose, with lightning coursing through his entire body. In the next moment, his form, swift as lightning, struck towards the Flood Dragon King's weak point. He swung the large blade in his hand, aiming at the Flood Dragon King's neck and slashing upwards fiercely. The immense impact caused the Flood Dragon King to involuntarily lift its head. The dragon breath about to be released from its mouth deviated from its intended direction. Immediately after, Jin Genu spun around, using the momentum to swing the large blade in a full circle, slashing towards the top of the Flood Dragon King's head. Although this strike didn't sever the Flood Dragon King's neck, it did abruptly halt the dragon breath. At this moment, the tentacles on Jin Genu's body also became active, controlling several long swords to thrust towards the Flood Dragon King. They pierced the neck area where flesh and bone were barely connected. The successive attacks caused the Flood Dragon King to grimace and howl in pain. Seizing this opportunity, Jin Genu once again raised his blade and leaped high. As the blade fell, the Flood Dragon King's head was severed and flew off. He threw a big iron fist right at the monster's face. The effect was immediate. Its face still bore an expression of disbelief. Just then, a system pop-up appeared, indicating that the parasite was requesting to devour the Flood Dragon King. After a moment of contemplation, he surprisingly agreed to the parasite's request. Wasn't he afraid that the parasite might turn against its host after becoming stronger? In an instant, a head several times larger than the Flood Dragon King's emerged from Jin Genu's body, swallowing the Flood Dragon King's head. And so, one of the underground maze's overlords met its end. At once, the members of the Joel maze were overwhelmed with excitement, cheering jubilantly. However, at this moment, no one noticed the subtle changes occurring on Jin Genu's body. The tentacles attached to his body transformed into a set of rock-solid scales. This was a defensive skill acquired after the parasite devoured the Flood Dragon King's core. It's good, but the appearance leaves something to be desired. Meanwhile, a major problem remained unsolved. The siege beasts were now less than 3 meters away from the maze's core. A group of small jello-off snakes fearlessly stood guard around the core. However, as a system prompt sounded, the massive bodies of the siege beasts began to disintegrate amidst agonizing wails. This didn't seem to be Jin Genu's doing. It appeared to be an autonomous defensibility acquired when the Jaw maze reached level 5. In contrast, the monsters of the Flood Army, no longer suppressed by the Flood Dragon King or perhaps frightened out of their wits, fell into a frenzy. They began to fight and devour each other in secret. Jin Genu coldly observed the scene before him. It was time to end all of this. With a thought, the maze's core immediately lit up with a dazzling light. In an instant, dozens of level 5 Jello defenders appeared from the light. The little monster instantly became docile. Following the direction of Jin Genu's blade, the Jello maze members were instantly filled with passion. They wanted to avenge their fallen comrades and completely annihilate these invaders. The monster that had just swallowed the man found him stickier than chewing gum. Who would have thought that in the end, the man would be headed with a single slash? His subordinates were also completely wiped out. After the battle, the control system quickly compiled the statistics. In this campaign, over 400 enemies were eliminated. the spoils of war were too numerous to count. Except for the Jello mages who suffered no casualties, the other units had lost as many as 50 people. Nearly half of the total force was lost, which deeply saddened Jean Geniu. He proposed building a cemetery where the fallen warriors would be honored eternally. His actions greatly moved Lisa. No wonder the soldiers of the Jello Maze, when facing enemies 5 times their number, still fought fearlessly and held their ground to the death. As Lisa was lost in thought, Jean Geniu inquired about her injuries. She moved her arm, which had been healed by the priest, indicating she was fine. She then suggested to Jean Geniu that the most urgent matter now was to set out immediately. To take over the Flood Dragon King's dragon maze to prevent other monsters from seizing it first. Hearing this, Jean Geniu immediately decided to lead troops there. "Before I kill you, hurry up and return the money." Unexpectedly, the little monster waved its hands repeatedly, indicating it didn't have it. This was the crystal tunnel the Flood Dragon King had dug earlier to attack them. It would only take half a day to reach the dragon maze. Just as they were about to leave, Cunian appeared, dragging a rat-faced fellow. This was the underground black market dealer who had sold him the parasite earlier. This guy's information network was truly impressive. Jean Geniu was also curious about his purpose for appearing. Unexpectedly, the black market dealer didn't beat around the bush this time. He directly offered to buy the Flood Dragon King's corpse at a high price. That was perfect, as Jean Geniu had plenty of other spoils to sell as well. But this wasn't actually the real purpose of the black market dealer's visit. The dealer rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a box. He then opened it, revealing contents that surprised Jean Geniu. It was an intricately crafted ring. Immediately, a series of system notifications sounded. Jean Geniu was appointed as a baron of the underground world. The Jello Maze became his legal territory. Intelligent creatures from other underground mazes could no longer infiltrate the Jello Maze. Baron Jean Geniu gained the qualification to form a knightly order. He also enjoyed the authority of a lower noble. These newly unlocked privileges and rewards both shocked and delighted Jean Geniu, although he had long known that the black market dealer's background was terrifyingly powerful. He still couldn't help but try to probe for more information, understanding the dealer's evasiveness, who claimed to be just a delivery person. Jean Geniu had to let it go, but it was strange that the dealer followed them all the way to the dragon maze. "Very well, I'm starting to appreciate your impression," as he spoke, his fist tightened again, but this little monster was also quite perceptive. Fortunately, he couldn't be bothered to ask further and led his group into the maze. At this time, the dragon maze was ownerless, so its core had risen on its own, exposed to the outside. Looking at the level 7 maze core, the black market dealer's eyes flashed with greed. So he pretended to be well-intentioned and mentioned that although the Jello maze had won the previous battle, it was only a Pyrrhic victory, and they currently lacked the strength to take over the dragon maze. He offered to buy the dragon maze at a high price to help Jean Geniu, who would have thought that Jean Geniu would completely ignore his proposal. He responded with actions instead. At Jean Geniu's command, the Jello maze members began to ransack the place like hungry wolves. He also ordered the doorbeasts to destroy everything they couldn't take with them. Jean Geniu's actions shocked the black market dealer, who hurriedly tried to stop him. Because his actions would cause this area to lose its foundation, making it impossible for new mazes to appear. Little did he know, this was exactly what Jean Geniu wanted. Ignoring the dealer's protests, he directly removed the dragon maze's core. He didn't want another Flood Dragon King-like maze power appearing near his territory. The black market dealer was so angry, he nearly called for an ambulance on the spot. Of course, Jean Geniu wasn't completely heartless. To appease the dealer, he left a pile of miscellaneous armor scraps in the corner, specifically for him. This infuriated the dealer even more, his facial features contorting. It hurriedly reached into its clothes and started searching. The next second, a large red gemstone was presented to Kim Jin-woo. "I want money, who wants your stinking dog shit?" But on second thought, even scrap metal was worth something, better than nothing. Just as the black market dealer was about to pick them up, he was blocked by falling boulders. One couldn't help but feel sorry for him. It was truly tragic. At this moment, Lisa's voice sounded from behind. Turning around, he saw a large group of small creatures following Lisa. They were the horned rats who had long been enslaved by the Flood Dragon King. Now, the horned rats were filled with anxiety and unease, waiting for their new master's decision. But it seemed, Jean, you had already thought about how to arrange them. Meanwhile, this battle had already caught the attention of various factions in the underground world. What they never expected was that the Jalamaze could defeat the Dragon Maze with such a small force. Soon the news quickly spread to the ears of various big shots. The big shots had different views on the Flood Dragon King's defeat. These two lords who were obsessed with exotic weapons daily were curious about what kind of weapon could kill the Flood Dragon King. The kawaii, pink-dressed Dream Palace Lord, however, had an indifferent attitude. The usually low-key and cautious Swamp Lord became even more cautious after hearing the news. He warned his subordinates not to let arrogance ruin them. In another place, the Bow Clan Lord was worried that without the Flood Dragon King's deterrence, the long-dormed Spirit King would soon come out to cause trouble. Also, the undead lord who ruled over a vast cemetery woke from his slumber upon hearing the news, seemingly wanting to take advantage of the situation. The sound wave disturbed the bodyguard's eyes, causing tears to flow uncontrollably from their nostrils. However, upon closer inspection, damn, the shit really smelled good. It was actually a velvet gemstone. It was a gemstone formed on a rare plant that grows in geysers. The man led a group of monsters to loot and plunder. He also recruited a large group of horn rats, planning to take them back as laborers. Seeing that Jean Geniu was willing to take in these horn rats, Lisa, being very perceptive, stood before the horn rats and proclaimed Jean Geniu's feat of slaying the Flood Dragon King. She also mentioned that Jean Geniu had been recognized by the underground world and granted a noble title. This immediately made the horned rats stand at attention and kneel down, willing to submit. At this time, the ring representing Jean Geniu's Baron status kept flashing on his hand. Since the horned rats chose to submit, Jean Geniu decided to establish some rules. He directly grabbed one horned rat, examined it carefully, and found that this horned rat was emaciated and listless. Looking at the other horned rats behind him, they were all in the same condition. He felt a pang of compassion in his heart. He promised on the spot that he would ensure they had 3 meals a day, 8 hours of sleep, 5 hours of entertainment, and 2 days off each week. This was practically civil servant treatment, but after hearing his words, the horned rats didn't seem happy. Instead, they became more panicked. They all thought Jean Geniu was just trying to fatten them up for food. Seeing this, Jean Geniu grabbed a playful Jalawa snake nearby. He then reiterated that his words were not empty promises. If they worked well for him, they'd have meat at every meal. Due to its rarity and special growing environment, it was almost impossible for humans to find it. Usually, people could only venture to kill dangerous monsters to obtain it, therefore its price remained high. After all, they had just killed hundreds of flood dragons. This finally made the horned rats let down their guard and decide to follow him to the death. 2 days later, inside the Jella Maze, after much consideration, Jean Geniu decided to place both cores in the Jella Maze. Even though no one had ever done this before, he wanted to try. As the level 7 core of the Dragon Maze was placed, the maze center instantly radiated with light. This made Jean Geniu panic momentarily, worried that it might be about to explode from energy overload. But the next second, a system prompt appeared, stating that to adapt to the level 5 main core, the level 7 composite core would be reduced to level 5 for compatibility. This would greatly improve maze efficiency. However, synchronizing the 2 cores would require 6 days of data matching. At present, the effect of merging the cores seemed quite promising. Taking advantage of this idle time, Jean Geniu asked Domi about the settlement of the horned rats. Speaking of this, Domi seemed to have a hard time explaining. Due to the good food and drink in recent days, the horned rats were having trouble adapting. There were also rumors within the Jello Amaze about raising them for food. Jean Geniu felt exasperated about this. He instructed Domi that at the right time, he could pick out a few troublemakers to kill as a warning. Faced with Jean Geniu's decisiveness, Domi could only tearfully carry out the order. His angry expression made it hard for Jean Geniu not to suspect that Domi actually wanted to taste the horned rats himself. Just 1 carrot could easily sell for millions. The one before him could probably sell for tens of millions without even looking closely. Shocked and excited, his hands were trembling involuntarily, and his grip unconsciously tightened a bit. Perhaps sensing that Jean Geniu's expression was off, Domi quickly changed the subject, reporting on the progress of post-war work. After several days of sorting, they had completed extracting gems from the flood dragon corpses. A total of over 400 velvet gems of various grades were harvested. The most precious gem among them was this Blood Rage Heart. Such a huge harvest was enough to compensate for all the losses in this campaign. But the joy lasted no more than 2 seconds before Domi brought Jean Geniu back to reality. Because after the maze upgraded to level 5, the territory had expanded greatly. And they had also incorporated a large number of horn rats. He proposed a major layout and planning for the entire Jello maze. This gave Jin Jinyu, who only wanted to be a hands-off boss, a headache. He then instructed Domi to find Kunian and Lisa to discuss it together. He would leave enough gems for them to use. Meanwhile, somewhere in the underground maze, a human exploration team was being attacked by a powerful monster covered in armor. This young man didn't look like a normal human at all, yet he was thriving among a bunch of monsters. But he would often revert to human form to operate in the human world. Today was another day for Jin Jinyu to return to human form and sell gems to the black market dealer. The two were now old acquaintances, and the transaction was quickly completed, returning to the underground John maze. His actions had a different meaning in the little monster's eyes. It immediately broke out in a cold sweat, clearly wanting to save its life. When wasn't enough, it had to add more. Understanding instantly, it reached into its clothes again. Jin Jinyu, as usual, inquired about the maze's recent operations. In fact, the daily operations of the maze were already well managed by Domi. But faced with the master's inquiry, Domi naturally had to find something to report even if there was nothing. So he informed Jin Jinyu that the horn rats had joined various tasks in the maze. And were getting along well with the Jello people, among other things. But Domi also complained about one situation. That is, the work efficiency of the horn rats was far lower than that of the Jello snakes. For this, Domi had specifically asked Lisa. According to her, it was due to differences between species. So after understanding this, Domi, based on the horned rat's tunneling skills, reassigned most of the horned rat's positions to digging tunnels and widening ditches. This was considered optimizing allocation and making the best use of resources. Undeniably, Domi knew how to report works. First, he pointed out the difficulties encountered in the work, then subtly expressed his methods of solving the problems to demonstrate his professional capabilities. Domi then remembered another thing he needed to report. He instructed the Jalawa snakes to bring the two processed blood rage hearts. The one on the left was verified by the laboratory, while the one on the right was polished in the wild training workshop. Unexpectedly, as soon as Jin Jinyu picked up the laboratory-verified one, the gem control system prompted that the parasite was requesting to devour it. This time, it took out another blue velvet gemstone. This scene left Kim Jin-woo at a loss. These two treasures were worth tens of millions. Just a few days ago, it had swallowed the gem from the Flood Dragon King's skull. Now it was pulling this trick again. It seemed this worm was getting a bit cocky and losing sight of priorities. As Jin Jinyu hesitated whether to feed the gem to the parasite, Domi suggested letting the parasite devour the gem. His reasoning was simple. That is, after the gem was swallowed, it could provide Jin Jinyu with new skills. And unlike other parasites, it didn't need to consume the host blood to strengthen itself. Domi's suggestion surprised Jin Jinyu, and his expression changed. Noticing Jin Jinyu's sudden change in expression, Domi was immediately frightened and hurriedly turned away, not daring to make eye contact. But Jin Jinyu thought again and realized Domi was right. Without the parasite, he wouldn't have been able to defeat the Flood Dragon King. He steeled himself and agreed to the parasite's request to devour. His arm instantly transformed into the parasite's form and swallowed the gem in one gulp. The next second, the control system prompted that he had gained a new skill called Disguise. After activating this skill without special detection, the skill would make the host body unrecognizable. Jin Jinyu immediately followed his instinct. He activated the Disguise skill. In an instant, his arm miraculously disappeared from everyone's sight. With another thought, he deactivated the skill and his arm reappeared. Unexpectedly, the control system's pop-up window appeared again. It indicated that after devouring the gem, the parasite had reached its growth limit and needed to sleep for a week to break through its own growth limit. Whether the parasite's evolution was good or bad for Jin Jinyu remained unknown. In his excitement, his grip tightened even more. But the little monster's face was now red from being choked, clearly reaching its limit. It couldn't help but let out a loud roar, and the gemstones in its hand flew into the air. Anyway, he didn't consider himself a normal human, so he didn't care. He picked up the other gem, and the system prompt he received was: embedding the gem in a weapon would grant a special function, but what specific function wasn't mentioned. This gave Jin Jinyu the idea of getting a specialized weapon. With matters settled, Jin Jinyu instructed Domi to take good care of things. He would be leaving for a few days to go to the 7th floor of the underground. Domi was very worried about this. After all, the parasite had fallen into a dormant state. What if he encountered powerful monsters? Jin Jinyu told Domi not to worry. He was a man who could fight hell spiders single-handedly. He was just commissioned to investigate the whereabouts of werewolves on the 7th floor. This was because a trend of breeding and enslaving underground intelligent creatures had become popular in the human world. The black market dealer had reluctantly asked Jin Genu for help. At the time, after understanding the situation, Jin Genu immediately refused in a rage. But the dealer also had his own difficulties. He really couldn't afford to offend the client. Fortunately, the dealer's moral compass was still quite straight. He instructed Jin Genu to just go to the designated location on the 7th floor, and that would suffice. In a flash, Kim Jin-woo quickly released the little monster. He darted towards the falling gemstones, but only managed to catch one. The other bounced off his wrist and flew away. Jin Genu reluctantly agreed, but when he arrived on the 7th floor, he found that there was already an expedition team, seemingly also investigating the werewolves' whereabouts.